You're about to make a terrible mistake. Be careful, white news, a grave mistake. Did you know where it came from? And the family of those who think this? Mistake. A grave mistake. Don't beat yourself up, my friend. I'm not coming to judge you or challenge you. I just want to tell you that our mind, which thinks logically, makes regular mistakes. But before you doubt your intelligence, let me assure you that this is not a defect in you, but it happens because of the existence of biases in our thinking confuse the mind and prevent it from seeing the whole truth. But don't worry, every need has a solution. But before we get into the solutions and methods, we first need to know what these logical biases are, and the seed is ours, the genius falls into it. And this is what we are talking about in today's episode based on the book You Are About to Make a Fatal Mistake by Olivia Siboney. We will start with 5 biases into which we fall into thinking or prejudice. It is the storytelling trap. The story is that in 1975, after the first oil shock, the French government ran an advertising campaign encouraging energy saving, and in that same year, 2 people spoke to the French oil company and said that they had developed a revolutionary technology that could discover oil deep in the ground without drilling, and all that would happen was that a plane would fly above the place. So you inhale the oil found in the embrace of the earth. The company heard these words and welcomed it very much, especially since the project showed clear success in the test flights, and the matter reached the Prime Minister and the French President, who were very happy, but surprisingly, the matter turned out to be a fraud. The problem remains that all these people are scientists, CEOs, and the President of the state, who failed the project because they wanted to believe it. And here is the link of opportunity. We too make the same mistake, and he laughs at us simply because of the story he told us in the beginning. We liked it, and based on that, we turn to the information that supports it only. Scientifically, this mistake is called confirmation bias, and it is one of the most common sources of logical errors, and it depends on a certain hypothesis, which you accept from the beginning, and then when you come to search, do you only search for information that supports this hypothesis? Because you started from the end, you saw the result and put the information in its context. The second trap or mistake is the trap of imitation, and this is the trap. Can we discover it from a story like this? Do you know it well? It is noted, of course, that years after the death of Steve Jobs. However, he still occupies a prominent position in the world, and any talk about the iPhone and MacBook is still associated with his name, and almost every few years since the book was published, he talks about his winning genius, his habits, his ways of thinking, and how we can follow up on something, and all the sweet words that are mentioned are not alone. I mean, you have Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. The same thing happens to them. Frankly speaking, these people's stories are inspiring and beautiful, but the problem happens when we start to forget that the company was successful for just one person, and imagine that all aspects of this person's behavior are the reason for his success. We are also running to imitate it. Is Apple successful? Why is Steve Jobs the genius? The answer is no. We have heard a story hundreds of times before about fantastic success and amazing heroism involving Steve Jobs, and of course no one can deny the importance of his role, but we have met thousands of employees who certainly contributed to this success, and the evidence is Apple's continuation after Jobs' death. Let the Apple story remain linked in our minds to Busty, but quite simply, because we tend to attribute any success or even failure to only one person and to all other factors. This is our first mistake, which is human error. The second mistake is called the halo effect. I mean, as long as Steve Jobs is a genius, anything he does is great. This is of course not real, and not everything he does works for us. It magically transforms us, and we will become the next Steve Jobs. That is why it is important that we know our abilities and learn and develop ourselves as much as we can. We do not run after rare symbols. The whole world is trying to imitate them. The third luxury is the trap of intuition, and this takes us back to the year 1994 when Quaker bought a company called Sanibel. This was a juice and iced tea company for one. 0.000000000. 10 years before that, the CEO of Quaker had bought Gatorade, which also sold drinks and made it a very distinctive brand. He was confident that he could achieve the same success with Snapple, but the truth is that this purchase was a disaster because it was based on intuition. Feeling is just its friend, and intuition really has a big role in our decisions, but it is not always correct, so we must learn how to tame it and know its value and gain it for us. When can psychology help us? Your neighbor, who studied the subject of this incident, says that decision makers do not always have time to analyze and study their decisions. So they resort to their feelings, and that's it. And indeed this event can be useful, but in certain cases and under conditions. Len also tells you the story of the commander of the fire brigade who, according to his method, said that the house that she was using was collapsing, and after a few seconds he started giving orders to those who were with him that they should evaluate the house, and in fact, as soon as they left the house. Reality, and when the man wonders how he made this decision, he didn't know how to answer, just talk to me and keep quiet. No, look into the matter, and discover that the intuition here was neither a coincidence nor a supernatural force. No, this was just a process of remembering, and it happened quickly without anyone taking notice of it. I mean, because of his experiences, and what he saw at work, he noticed things that said that this house would fall. Even if there was no awareness in his mind, at that moment, this speech still did not surprise the supporters of reasoning and bias, so they said that we should be careful of the average experts or in themselves, and they reached the level of research and faith, and they are because they often make mistakes, okay. Then, who is correct? The truth is that both are correct, but according to the field, what does it mean? The two schools were sitting and so on in a reconciled number, and they discovered that we can coordinate in the limit on our behalf, but only if two conditions are present, but the two are that the environment has authority over it. What's the meaning? It means an environment or field in which we can predict causes and results. The second condition is the possibility of acquiring great training and experience in this environment. This means that it will support him in the end. It is a process of getting to know cases we have experienced before, so we can coordinate in it. If we know how, we can identify similar cases. It has come back to us, and we have really learned how to deal with it. I mean, for example, firefighters or nurses work in somewhat regular environments. In these environments, they have warning signs around certain situations. This means that monitoring burning buildings or emergency patients can, over time, provide them with information that helps them in anticipating what will happen and how to act. But in areas such as what happens here in psychiatry or the stock market is unreliable because these environments are complex and impossible to predict. So in any situation you need to ask yourself whether you meet these conditions in order to rely on your intuition or not. The fourth luxury is the trap of overconfidence. In the early 2000s, movie and video game rental company Blockbuster dominated the market. At that time, at the same time, a startup company entered the competition, but in a different way, with a monthly subscription of $20. Customers can choose the movies they want on the company's website. These films were sent to me at home for free, packaged, and in good condition. This was a company, then it was Netflix. At the time, it was not yet making profits and was in need of significant financing, so Reed Hastings, its CEO, was happy to offer the company Blockbuster. By purchasing 49% of Netflix for $50 million, and Netflix is running an infidel on Blockbuster on the internet, Rafat John, you are Yoko, the CEO of the company, and he also mocked him because he simply did not see in this company the threat from the seller in the first place. In the year 2002, Netflix had 1 million subscribers left. They approached 600,000 in 2006 with the same simple technique for rent and postage. In 2018, with the development of the site, the value of Netflix reached $180 billion, meaning $3. Double the price that you, Yuko, and on the other hand, could have paid, on the other hand, Blockbuster Company in the year 2000, and what happened will not be forgotten. B asks a very important question, are you? He was less confident in himself before the deal, and when the company existed. Now we cannot be sure of that, but we can say that excessive confidence in himself is the reason for the company's fate, and this is an important warning coming from the past and the future. We stop overestimating ourselves and stop watching. We are better than those around us. Stay humble, my friend. Appreciate the size of the challenges and believe in the possibility of failure and stumbling in order to work it out. The last trap is the trap of groupthink. In order to understand this point, let me tell you the story of the year 1961, shortly after the inauguration of John Kennedy as President of America. A decision was issued to send a battalion of Cuban expatriates who had been trained in the Central Intelligence Agency to invade Cuba, but they failed miserably. Within days, all the forces that were against Cuban leader Fidel Castro fought and were arrested. Years later, historians wondered how Kennedy and his inner circle were among the best and brightest of their time. They made this unwise decision and imagined that the Kuwaiti people welcomed them. In the memoirs of Arthur M. Alzinger Jr., the special assistant to the Canadian, they said, after this disaster happened, he blamed himself for being silent during the discussion of the idea in the Council of Ministers, and he could not say that the idea was a failure for me because of groupthink. This man was convinced that the decision he was taking was wrong, but he did not express his doubts and sided with the prevailing opinion of the group and its leader, and this issue is repeated all the time. In some cases, it is clearer than that, such as the experiment spread on the internet in which someone asks them to compare the length of lines on paper and to answer out loud. The first participant is in collusion with the researcher and answers, and it is a mistake that the last person to answer is the real person in the experiment. The test was simple: either the crystal clear truth was described or it matched the group's wrong opinion, and the results of this experiment still surprise scientists until now, because 3/4 of the participants chose at least once that they agreed with the group's opinion as soon as they knew that this answer was wrong. I mean, in the end, we all fall in love with my friend. You already know the 5 mistakes and biases that you can fall into while making your decisions. It can be imagined that you are thus immune to them and that it is impossible for you to fall into them. Correct? I would have liked to tell you, oh my friend, but unfortunately attempts to correct biases, Debbie, face 3 problems. The first is that we can easily see the biases of others, but we cannot see our own biases, and also in real life, unlike the experiences we mentioned, there is never a single bias. On the contrary, most mistakes contain a lot of bias. The third problem is that even if we are able to overcome our biases and remain rational decision makers, we can also make mistakes. Yes, what does the solution mean, Green? Before I say the solution, we need to differentiate between two very important things, which are the individual and the organization. The biases that we discussed here mostly affect the individual, but the strategic mistakes that we analyzed are not made by individuals, rather by one person, and they are, by the entire organization or company. That is why we need to look at decision-making mechanisms. We try to improve it at the organizational level because it is this way, but if it can address the biases of individuals, how can the decisions be sound? It depends on two things, but they are cooperation and procedures. Cooperation is important, because with the number of people involved in decision-making plus the possibility and ability to discover biases and procedures increases, of course, because everything is accurate and clear and everyone knows it so that no mistakes occur. How do we apply it? This is what it has three basic pillars to ensure that the right decisions are made. The first pillar: if there is an important decision that must be taken within the company, then there must be a real dialogue around it, a dialogue between differences and discussions that have a goal. The question here remains, how can you stimulate the appropriate amount of disagreement without harming some of the chairs? In order to stimulate a real dialogue, you must create a group of actions or such that you bring together what you can from diverse viewpoints. What is meant by diversity here is people with different skills in different departments. You also have to start the dialogue, take enough time, and let it take its course for 2 or 3 hours normally. The third procedure to ensure the quality of the dialogue is to differentiate between the time for discussion and the time for decision-making. Not all meetings come out with decisions, but it is important to specify in the agenda the goal of the meeting so that no one complains about the meetings. Debbie is wasting time, and we will not leave the dialogue like this. Yes, no, we must establish the basic rules of dialogue that prohibit behaviors that encourage herd mentality or prevent the expression of different opinions, and any decision or opinion that is expressed must be interpreted in order to prevent hasty decisions. Thus, we have concluded the first pillar, which is dialogue. Let us now go to the second pillar, which is difference. We said that dialogue is necessary to make good decisions, but still, this dialogue takes place between people who have the same opinions. Here we still need to encourage disagreement as much as we can and also try to see things from different angles. We can do this in many ways, such as appointing a group of informal consultants who can provide you with unfamiliar ideas and tell you their opinion in all honesty. You can also seek the opinions of experts from outside the company, because no matter what the internal difference of opinion is, it will be limited, and there is a very effective method called war simulation. This is a somewhat extreme method that allows you to appoint a team based on the truth to act as an adverse assessment of what your employees or decision makers came out with. There is also no objection to consulting your audience and remaining humble so that you can accept different points of view. You will also be able to change your mind according to the new information that comes to you. The last element in making correct decisions is the organization's procedures itself, which may push different viewpoints towards one traditional and friendly way of thinking. Of course, there are no magic methods that can change the culture of the organization immediately, but there are ways and methods that can help, such as creating an atmosphere of familiarity among employees, allowing the acceptance of different points of view. You must also promote a culture of speaking freely and rewarding people who have courage. They differ and make many experiments. Allow them to fail and learn from them as well. Do not make the decision alone. Because when 2 or more people share the responsibility for decision-making, this is the risk of biases, one individual, and finally making any decision at work and in our personal lives is easy. But with your knowledge and constant examination of your ways of thinking, you can decide correctly and lead the life you desire.